Hi David, it's me again. So for today's conference, I chose to analyze what I've learned and done so far this year with the RAs by comparing how my analysis has changed in regards to the rhetorical appeals, the rhetorical situation, and use of diction. Personally, I believe the RAs have allowed me to learn quite a bit about what to really think about when I'm reading a text and ways that I can break that down in order to have a better understanding of them. So without further ado, let's begin. So before, the appeals of logos, ethos, and pathos were chosen simply with thinking what the word means, like if it called to my emotions, if the author seemed intelligent, or if the information didn't seem biased concerning current events and so. I didn't really consider all of the ways that the author can communicate through the appeals, like they're listed in the appeals chart, and I only chose those fragments that seemed the most obvious to fall in that category. Also, I didn't really connect the dots between the author's reason for choosing that appeal and the way that it affected their image for the reader and their understanding as well. This definitely led me to be more wordy and imprecise when describing how the author appealed to ethos and didn't clarify when choosing a quote with two appeals. So like you can see, this is from Fishering. So I began to describe this and it was really wordy and I didn't really clarify what I wanted to say with each one. However, these aspects are now completely different and I interpret them in new ways that bring me closer to the story. So now the rhetorical appeals aren't just used for variety in the text, but they're used in specific places in order for the reader to have a higher engagement, and I emphasize the way that the author has benefited from this. So I can describe like in a more concrete and precise way what I want to say of how on Dumpster Diving, the author uses ethos and pathos for this fragment. Okay, so for diction, I compared a fragment from Saving Grace instead of Fishering because that's where we started doing analysis on diction. So at first, whenever I saw words that were advanced or flashy enough to seem suitable for an appeal, I would choose it without thinking about how it favors the appeal that the author applied, because I didn't make the connection. I simply explained how a certain word can be considered one of the appeals. So here, I only use, I say that surely it only applies to pathos, and that phrase, it just sounds very advanced and flashy, so I chose it to represent logos, even though it might not have been. Instead, now I see that diction is used for certain appeals in ways that have an effect on the text and the way the reader can perceive the author. So by explaining how each word supports certain appeals, I can also analyze how the author is more integrated and intelligently uses these details to contribute the way that the reader understands certain phrases and connotations that they give, acting in favor or against what is trying to be communicated. So for Dumpster Diving, I use logos and ethos for this quote, and I explain how each word that he uses, it tends to ethos or logos, and I say that it supports ethos by using logos in different ways, through the words like de-emulsifying and food preservation that appeal to logos and his knowledge, which therefore makes him more credible to the reader. So I thought that was a pretty good example to use for a comparison because dumpster diving is a much more, I'd say, advanced type of text, so it allowed me to have more emphasis and more like a deeper analysis of what I was trying to say with diction. Okay, so for the rhetorical situation, at first I didn't keep in mind that there were multiple answers and that they can come from analyzing beyond the information that I'm given, literally through context or the actual story. Like there's more than one right answer, like you've said so many times. So, for example, I used the rhetorical situation section of Fishering because we weren't analyzing diction yet. So Fishering had a decent amount of context about the author and the main topic, and so I used most of that to explain each aspect, but I didn't analyze it through my own perspective, and this led me to make it very wordy and imprecise, and I wasn't communicating what rhetorically I thought was the effect on the text and therefore the reader. So, for example, for audience, I probably could have said that in less words if I would have had a clear idea of what I was trying to say with the rhetorical situation, because I was just looking literally at what purpose, audience, or exigence means, and I didn't consider what could be beyond those meanings and analyze it through the text. But now I see that each aspect of the rhetorical situation is like I saw that it was too one-sided and I didn't establish the relationship between the text and the reader. But now I consider the what ifs and the things beyond the word purpose or speaker for what the author's message really is. So as you can see, this allowed me to be much more concrete and realistic about what I wanted to say in terms of true exigence of the author and their purpose for the reader through the text. Like, it's way less wordy than it was from this one, that is from Fishering. So for speaker, as an example, something that was very specific for me with the rhetorical situation is that I turned, instead of considering what speaker literally is, I chose to sensing the persona that the author was portraying and how they chose it to specifically complement exigence. And I realized this was much more valuable than literally considering who is communicating with the reader, because it's not the author that is directly speaking to the audience, but they take on different roles that appear to the reader as one with the text. So that is how I would summarize my learning and progress through the RAs throughout the first quarter. Thank you.